Friends, welcome back. We are joined by a very special guest, Tony Ortega, who has not only done relentless reporting recently on the Masterson case, Tony. I mean, you have been going, have you been there every day at the trial for the last, 3 weeks?
Every single day, even the days when I was the pool reporter and I was the only reporter in the room.
Wow. And hey, man, on a personal note, I really appreciate the daily reports. I've read every one of them and I've watched all the videos. And as far as I'm concerned, you're doing the best reporting on it. Are there other reporters that are, I haven't seen it in the news. I only get the daily reporting from you. Are there other reporters that are putting it out in the wider spectrum?
Yeah, there's some very good reporters, and one of the best things about this whole trial for me was we all got to know each other. We were all in the back row, and everyone's joking and helping each other out. I mean, if somebody misses a word, the others will tell them what it was, and some of them are putting out very detailed reports. The Wrap, for example, and Deadline. Those reporters were, covering just as much of the material as I was. My
Really?
little advantage
Hmm.
was that what they're doing there, they're the reporters in the room. They're collecting notes on what's going on. They're sending it to an editor. They're creating a story and then putting it out in a couple of hours. What I'm doing, I was just typing up everything everybody said, just
I know.
raw. And then at the break, I just went out to the hallway and just sent it to everybody. I didn't have to wait for an editor. So at some point, about one of the first few days, one of the reporters looked at me and said, "Are you filing at every break?" And I
Yes.
said,
I mean,
"Yes, I am,"
yep.
because I knew I once, when I had signed up to be a pool reporter during jury selection, and it turned out that the only people who signed up for that were myself and one other reporter,
Hmm.
and which surprised us. And so
Hmm.
for several days there, I had to take very, very detailed notes because they were going out to all the other reporters. I didn't dare miss anything.
Hmm.
And one day I shared that with my readers at the Substack and they loved it. And then I thought, hey, that's the little niche I can do. I'll
Hmm.
just type up everything so people feel like they're there because there's no cameras. And that just turned out to be great. So that's how I kind of found a little niche. Because let me tell you, there's some really good reporters there.
Hmm.
They were writing very good stories. Gene Mattis and Variety was doing killer stuff. Um, but I found a little niche that I think people really enjoyed.
I'll tell you on a personal level, man, it definitely feels like I'm in that freaking courtroom, and I guess that's why I've been oblivious of the other awesome reporting because I just you get it out so fast. It's the next best thing, man. I appreciate you taking the time to do that because a lot of us have been waiting a long time to see justice
Yeah,
served.
yeah,
And as you know, we have a deadlocked jury. They've been in there for
yeah,
what, 2 days? I'm sorry to hear that, man, because you gotta do a plane flight back in a week, and they're taking another week off, and, I mean, we were
yeah.
so hoping by Friday. But, let's pretend that so do people have to be living under a rock to not know about this, or would most people be familiar with the coverage, do you think, at least in the US?
I've seen a lot of complaints from people saying there's no coverage, there's no coverage. And what
Mhm,
that says to me, of course, there's tons of coverage. But what that says to me, you know how things are now with the way we live our lives with our phones.
mhm.
What that means is it's not showing up in their feed. It
I
doesn't that
see.
that doesn't mean that there's not coverage because there's coverage every day at all these, Deadline, Variety,
Mhm,
The
I do see
Wrap,
that, yeah.
LA Times,
Mhm,
Insider. All those reporters sit next to me. I know their stories are going out, but it's not getting into your daily feed the way the stories are, national politics, the
mhm.
Weinstein trial. And so people then say, oh, there's no coverage. They're so used to having things served up to them.
It's
So
true.
that's what I just assume people mean because all they have to do is type in Danny Masterson into Google, and of course, hundreds of stories will come up. But no, it's been well covered, but I understand why people feel like they haven't seen it, and
Mhm,
I think it's for a few different reasons. First of all, a lot of cases got delayed because of the pandemic.
mhm.
And now finally people can start coming into court without masks and stuff. And so all these judges scheduled their delayed trials all at the same time.
I see.
So,
That's why we have
yes,
Weinstein on the opposite side of the building.
we got Weinstein down the hall. And then in other parts of the country, you got the Kevin Spacey thing going on, the Paul
Mhm.
Haggis thing going
Yep.
on. They were all scheduled at the same time. And so, there was quite a bit of coverage of Danny's trial right at the beginning. But once you get down into the weeds and you've got your fifth witness about a particular incident, the reporters start going down the hall. And so there's just
I,
not as much coverage. I understand when people say they haven't seen the coverage, it's just not in their feed. But there is coverage there. But believe me, there was more at the beginning,
mhm.
and then it kind of ebbed in the middle, and then it started coming back up when they got to deliberations. That's just natural.
That makes sense. But let's pretend, okay, so I get this idea that a lot of people actually don't know what's going on or they're confused because, as you know, we've had everything from top celebrities coming and going, motion to dismiss, right, by Cohen constantly going on. There's been everything in this trial. So, for those that don't know what's going on, are you able to give a brief timeline? Not the trial, we'll get into that, but just the brief timeline about just how long this has been going on, how this started leading up to Danny actually going to trial. Is that too big of a
Right.
question, Tony?
No, no, I can do that.
Uh,
So I broke the story that Danny Masterson was under investigation by the LAPD on March 3rd, 2017,
mhm.
and they were looking into the allegations of three women at that point. A fourth woman soon joined them, but it wasn't until June 2020 that he was charged by the LA District Attorney's Office. He was charged with forcible rape, three counts, forcible rape against three women. He's a Scientology celebrity. They were Scientologists at the time of the
Mhm.
incidents between 2001 and 2003. The DA's office actually considered the allegations of five women, but
Wow.
only filed on three of them. Um, so the Scientology element has been important because part of it is, why is Danny Masterson going to trial in 2022 for something he's accused of doing in 2001 and 2003? And that's definitely a big part of the story, is that these women were Scientologists at the time. Two of them did report their incidents to this Hollywood Celebrity Center, and they were told it wasn't rape. Don't use that word rape. We don't use that word here. And they
Julian
were
Swartz
told
said that, right?
and Miranda Scoggins said that to
Mhm.
Jane Doe 3, and Julian Swartz said that to Jane Doe 1. And they went through the typical Scientology thing. What did you do to pull it in, right? what
Exactly.
what did you do to make yourself a victim?
And in what
And
lifetime?
in some past lifetime, you did something evil, and that's why something happened to you this time.
Yep.
So then they were terrified, right? And it wasn't
Mhm.
until, and that, part of the story is that Jane Doe 1 defied those rules, did go to the LAPD in 2004, but that Scientology swarmed that investigation with affidavits, and it was shut down. Um, Danny
Mhm.
then subsequently, uh, she was pressured into signing an agreement by the church. She was told, "Sign it or you'll be declared," and he gave her $400,000 to shut her up.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so that's how it went for 12 years, and then it wasn't until 2016 that they learned about each other. That whole time, they had assumed this only happened to them. Then in 2016, they found that there were other women with allegations against Danny, and they said, "That's it. We got to go to the police."
Do you mind if
So
I ask real quick, Tony? Because I've always
yeah,
wondered, because people think there's some conspiracy, but there's not. How did they actually come to find out that one another, had similar stories?
well, we heard in the trial how Jane Doe 2 and Jane Doe 3 became aware of each other, and that was
Mhm.
very intriguing. It was a dinner. Jane Doe 2 was invited at a woman's named Mariah O'Brien, who was
Mhm.
Bonnie Ribisi's ex,
Oh.
and Mariah and her friend started talking about Danny for some reason, and Jane Doe 2 just blurted out, "He raped me," and she left. And then at some point later, Jane Doe 3 had called Mariah for some reason and had asked her if she'd heard about any allegations about Danny, and Mariah put them in touch with each other. So that's how we know
Wow.
that how Jane Doe 2 and Jane Doe 3. Now, how Jane Doe 1 found out about Jane Doe 3 is a wild story that was never the trial, and I haven't told it yet, Doug, and I'm sorry, I'm holding back.
I want
It
the exclusive, Tony. Come
it
on,
it
man.
involves a witness that can't speak yet. So
Okay,
I'm
okay.
it's the thing is with
Interesting.
this, with Danny's defense, is
Mhm.
they've tried to pull me into the trial numerous times.
Didn't you get called to a sidebar, young
I
man?
got called to a sidebar, and
Were you a
they've
bad
been
boy, Tony?
no, no, it
Are
had
you
nothing to do with me.
irritating? I know,
But
but what
but no,
there
Cohen did try to pull me in numerous times. If you knew what he was talking about my website. And so
Mhm.
I have to be careful because
Totally, man, I completely understand.
but I'll just say this: how Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 3 found each other, then they subsequently found Jane Doe 2, is a wild story, and I can't wait to
Wow.
tell it.
Do you know when
but
you
it
can
was
report on that?
but it was just
After
super lucky. It was super
Mhm.
lucky, and
Wow.
the point is, after 2016, they finally knew about each other. So then they went to the LAPD,
Mhm.
and then it was a struggle. The first detective they had problems with, and that's the story I wrote when I broke this in March 2017. Was I wasn't just saying the guy's under investigation, but that the investigation's in trouble. The women were so unhappy they had written to the chief of police, and I had a copy of the note that they had sent. So it was interesting right from the beginning. That I mean, this is the
Mhm.
one thing I want people to understand about this whole case. Whatever the jury finds, innocent, guilty, hung jury, whatever.
Mhm.
To me, a big part of the story is how much these women have gone through just to get to this point. They have endured
Exactly.
so much from the LAPD, from the DA's office,
Alleged
fair
fair
game,
game.
fair game from Scientology, harassment, just horrible stuff,
I know.
ongoing. So, I mean, they really have struggled to get to this point, and so that's why I was happy to see them get that opportunity to testify.
Thanks to you, Leah, and the crew working behind the scenes to make that happen, quote unquote, because I know how long that these poor gals have been trying to,
Well, Leah
but they
and I have
certainly had
both been
support, right?
we've been very supportive, but I
Mhm.
wouldn't don't yeah, don't give me credit for that. They did all the work. They have put up
Totally.
with so many
I
difficulties.
can't even imagine, Tony. You know, I
Oh,
grew up in this
man.
freaking cult. Can you imagine what they've done to these gals? Now we have to say alleged
Oh,
because it hasn't been proven in the civil
that's
case
right.
yet, but let's be
Right.
honest. We know what these gals have been through. And they
Well,
had the
one of the
balls to still get up there. And can you imagine sitting across from Danny, Tony? You know, that one gal had a nervous breakdown. She was shaking. She could barely keep it together. Can you imagine the courage it took to get up there? I mean, you watch that.
and Jane Doe 3's panic attack was not really about Danny. It was about Scientology. That's what she was
Oh
talking
my
about.
god,
She
really?
was
What
talking
specifically, Tony,
about
about the
they
gaslighting and
asked her about the harassment, and she started to talk about her husband and her kids, and she
wow.
lost it.
This is the alleged throwing the rock through the window where the kids are at, that kind of
Well,
alleged
that
harassment?
that was the couple that had hamburger wrapped around rat poison thrown into their backyard that killed their dog. And of course, they can't prove it's Scientology. But let me
I
just
know, that's the
say that the
problem.
big bombshell in this trial about Scientology, obstruction of justice,
Mhm,
we learned that Lisa Marie Presley, from the prosecutor, we learned that Lisa Marie Presley was willing to come into court and testify that after Jane Doe 1 was had her, incident and was
mhm,
talking about going to the LAPD in late 2003, early 2004. When Jane Doe 1 was talking about going to the LAPD, Lisa Marie Presley was prepared to testify that the Church of Scientology asked her to dissuade her close friend, Jane Doe 1, from going to the police. Doug, that's obstruction of justice.
and
And
remember
and sh
Lisa had to get, cleared to testify because they thought they would, and rightfully so perhaps, bring her up on incriminating charges, but she got immunity, right?
she and then there's also a text from her later, years later,
Mhm,
apologizing for it. So there's real evidence, that she apologized for being part of that operation. So they wanted her to come in and testify about it. And you're right, her attorney showed up at the last minute and said, "Hey, wait a minute. I'm
mhm,
going to advise her to take the fifth." Because not only would she be testifying to a crime committed by Scientology, but one that she had taken part in.
exactly.
And so the DA assured them that it was past statute, but he offered immunity anyway. But then, Doug, we were so excited, our jaws had dropped. All the reporters were like, "Wow,
Yeah,
Lisa
we're
Marie
gonna
Presley."
finally get to see
And
her.
then the judge pulled the rug out from under. She
I
said,
know.
"You're not going to testify to that in my court because that's for the civil case. It has
Real
nothing to
that's
do.
right.
It
That's
has
right.
nothing to do with Danny's criminal case." And she had a point, but it was so disappointing. We were this close to testimony like that coming into an official court. Now, whether that, people have asked me, well, isn't it great for the civil case? It is. However, I seriously doubt there's going to be a trial in a civil case. You
What do
know
you
how
mean by
Miscavige.
that? What do you mean?
Well, you know how Miscavige is. What they'll do is they'll throw everything they possibly can at that civil lawsuit.
Yep.
They've already said that the next thing they already tried the arbitration thing, and that got overturned by the appellate court. So
That's disgusting.
the next
Yeah.
thing they say they're going to do is an anti-slap. An anti-slap motion stops everything for like a year. So they're going to keep throwing stuff at the case. And the Laura DiCrescenzo case is a perfect model.
Mhm.
They made her she had to go through 2 different motions for summary judgment. That's like a full-blown mini trial, right? And she won both of those, and they went to the US Supreme Court trying to fight giving her records. I mean, that poor woman, she went through 9 years of garbage. They were
Wow.
finally a few days from trial, and they had subpoenaed Miscavige to be in it, and he wrote a check and made it go away. That's what he
That's what he
does.
does. They always
And
wait till the last minute. You know, Tony, it's the playbook. They drag it out. They have the money, and then didn't they do that with Debbie Cook as well? You know,
Debbie Cook had done like 2 hours of testimony,
and they're like,
and it was
"That's it."
such a disaster. They paid her to end the lawsuit they had filed.
That's cr that's
That's
what
how
they do, though.
panicked they were.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what they
No, they
did.
just throw money at stuff and make it go away.
That is
And they
absolutely
couldn't do
amazing.
that with Masterson. They couldn't just settle it. And so they had to endure 5 weeks of testimony about how they treat people.
Yeah. Why do you think Scientology didn't disconnect from Danny, throw him under the bus, and have nothing to do with them? What are they getting out of it?
That's a great question. And people always would say to me, Tony, they're gonna just, throw them under the bus, but they never have.
I thought they were. I thought for I don't understand why they haven't.
Excuse me just a second.
Sure. I'll take a drink too.
Dealing with this cold. Anyway, so you asked why hasn't Scientology sort of dropped Danny Masterson? It's a great question because a lot of people predicted to me that they would, but they
Mhm.
haven't. Not only has Scientology pretty much stuck by Danny Masterson, although they're careful with their statements to say we don't interfere with criminal matters, blah blah.
Right.
But I mean, they actually had an attorney, a Scientology attorney, come to the criminal case and try to intervene. I've never seen anything like that. I mean, usually they stay behind the scenes, but they actually had a attorney come into court and object to something the judge had said about the church. It was just amazing. So they've stuck
Wow.
by him. I'm not 100% sure why, but
Mhm. What if you had to
they.
take a guess? Do you have any guess, any intuition about it?
I mean, the one thing I think Sonny Pereira said something to me that was really insightful. She said that he's connected to so many
That's what I thought.
people, and if they kicked him out, they'd probably leave too.
Not only that, but yeah, so there's the money, and I mean, I ran with not Danny, but the little other crowd, a couple of his step Alana and, Jordan were in
Alana
my acting
Jordan,
class. It's a very small clique, as you know, Tony,
right?
and, they would lose a lot of people, but I was thinking, "So what?" I mean, their
I
ass.
know.
I don't
I
know.
think at some level, it's just kind of a mystery why they're still sort of sticking by this guy. But he rolled the dice, and he's
Yeah.
doing better than people thought at this point. We don't know yet, but
I can't believe it, Tony. Up until 2 days ago, I'm thinking and I'm reading every one of your Substack articles. I'm going, "There's no way this guy's gonna walk," but you made a great point. You said, "Look, half the reporters I talked to said, 'Oh, it's a slam dunk case.'" And then just as credible reporters have said the opposite. I wanted to ask you, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. You don't have to answer anything. I don't wanna get you in any trouble. But I was really curious if you put aside your reporter hat and your professionalism and you just went with your emotions. You've been sitting there every single day watching this. If you were a juror, do you mind if I ask you how you would rule it? Or is
I'm
that a little do you wanna not answer that question? Do you know what I
no,
mean?
I mean, the thing is, like I said, I came into this, my sort of angle on it was I wanted people to know what these women had been through.
Mhm.
So I think, I'm doing my best to be fair. I'm trying to report things I'm hearing
You
coming from
are.
both sides. And so I'm kind of keeping my own personal feelings down as much as I can,
Mhm.
just because I think that's better for my readers. Um,
It is effective, by the way. I do like the fine line that you're walking, but surely deep down, you must sitting there watching the testimony, you must have like I said, you don't have to answer that. I was
Well,
just
no, I mean, I just the one of the issues for me, and Leah and I talked about this the other day on my podcast with her.
it's a great
The
podcast, by
thing
the way.
is, she and I know things that the jury hasn't heard. She and I know things that weren't entered as evidence. She and I know things that none of the other reporters know about. And that kind of colors the way I feel about it,
I
is
see.
that
I see.
Jane Doe will say something, and then the defense attorney Cohen will say, "Yeah, but didn't you say this then?" Kind of gets them flustered.
Mhm.
But I know the background to that particular scene, and I know what other documents there are. So
Mm.
it's hard for me to really separate myself from all that and think, if I was a juror, what would I think? I will say this. I will say this. Um, if I'm not surprised that it's a divided jury, I would just say that there has been some brutal testimony that would convince somebody that these rapes happen and that this guy should pay a price. But, the defense, Cohen has done a pretty good job showing, okay, but in 2004 you said this and now you're saying that. And that can put a little doubt in a
Really?
juror's
That's
ear.
enough to
So,
kind of do it?
well,
This
what
seems
the thing
so
about
minor
when
to
you're
me.
talking about a sexual assault case where it's been a while since the things happened, that's a tough one anyway. It's
Good
people have
point.
different feelings about it, and that's why they brought in that expert to say
Right.
women react differently to being raped by someone they know or someone they're in a relationship than to a stranger. But it's still hard. I understand why it's hard for people to think to themselves, okay, he may have raped her, but why did she, send him a text 3 days later? Why did she go to an event and say hi to him a year later? And I understand why people have a hard time with that. So the prosecution did its best to explain that,
I thought they
but
did a good job because it
I
made
thought they
sense to
did a
me.
good job as well. And it seemed, but what I'm saying is, I guess what I'm saying, and I know it's a bit of a cop out. I can understand. I can see what the jurors are feeling that are for conviction, and I can see what the jurors are thinking
Very
for
interesting.
acquittal. But
Wow.
here's the problem: we don't know what they're hung up on. We don't know what
You have
particular.
no clue, no
Well,
guess,
we
there's
can't.
no
I
rumors,
know there's been some people that have come into the courtroom and sort of like read the body language, and they think they know what's
right.
going on. And
That's
I
not
think
accurate,
I
though.
think body language experts are the new ESP, Doug. I think
I
it's
think
just
they're the
like
new age cult, bro. I thought cult forming around that Tony soon. I'm telling you, it's all the rage. You gotta get
it
on it.
is all the rage. But we really don't know we don't know the split. Is it 6-6? Is it eight
Mhm.
four? Is it 11-1 for conviction, 11-1 for acquittal? We have no idea. What are they hung up on? Are they hung up on particular statements? Because, they had some testimony read back by Jane Doe 1 about the phone call she had with Miss Gavage, the phone call she had with Danny after she went to Florida. So that might suggest, okay, they're having some issues with her, how she described that phone call. Maybe they have an issue with Jane Doe 1's case.
Right.
But then we find out that they're stuck on all three. That suggests it's less about any particular testimony and more the concept of what these women are saying. So, but I don't
Wow.
know.
Interesting,
Again, that's the
interesting.
kind of guesswork that I try to stay away from because we just don't
I
know. Now,
understand.
next when we go back next week, they're going to deliberate for a little bit, and then Deputy DA Anson told us that they will then bring them out and give the attorneys from both sides an opportunity to question them to see if there's some issues they can clear up.
Wow. Is that a
And at
just
that
normal
point,
procedure
yeah,
at a deadlock?
that's California law. So
Interesting.
apparently, at that point, we may learn a lot more. Now, I don't know if I assume will be in the room. Reporters will be in the room. But anyway, we'll probably at that point learn a lot more about what's going on. But at this point, we just don't know.
Do you think that if more evidence was allowed to be brought in on Scientology's roles, for example, why didn't they have the pre-clear folder subpoenaed, and then all of a sudden the ethics officer, one that you mentioned that actually wrote all this down, is suddenly quote unquote missing, and the stuff that you and Leah know for both sides, Bill pro and against conviction. If all the evidence was, I know this can't happen, and I do understand why Scientology specifically isn't being put on trial, but let's just say with what you know, would that sway you one way or the other more? Do you think that there would be more of a case for the gals, for example?
There's more evidence about Scientology's role. And I think that's why it's not coming in because it not doesn't necessarily, affect the evidence against Masterson. It just shows what Scientology was doing. But, other stuff that's frustrating, like people always bring up to me the DJ name, DJ Donkey Punch, because
And they couldn't
it
admit that either, could
it
they?
it's just like, so it seems so blatant that in the same period that he had this pattern with these 4 women, because they didn't allow Jane Doe 4 to come in. This, all 4 women testified, well, Jane Doe 2 didn't, but the others testified that, they were anally raped and that he's got this thing about that. And then
Mhm.
at the same time, he's performing under a DJ name with a slang reference to anal rape. And, people are bewildered. Why can't you bring that in? It's like almost like he's advertising. But it was explained to me the problem is you can have a DJ
And not be a
named
rapist.
DJ Donkey Punch who's not a rapist. And
Yeah, it's a
so
great point. It's a
it's
great I
not
can
it's
understand
not
that.
evidence of anything. It
Makes sense.
suggests something. It's but so stuff like that, the jury's just not going to hear. Now, Jane Doe 4, who's Trisha Vesey, she allowed me to use her name.
Oh,
She
wow.
testified and she did say that, Donkey Punch, but I don't, but it was immediately stricken, and it
Yeah.
was without any context. So I'm pretty sure that the jury didn't know what they were hearing.
What role do you think Scientology has possibly played behind this? What would they be doing in something like this? Now, you said there was one of their lawyers that came in once, but we know Scientology. What would they be doing behind the scenes possibly?
I mean, I think mainly just keeping an eye on it. I know people, are wondering, did they get in the jury? Or are they affecting the jury? We don't see any evidence of that. But there's no
Okay.
question they are keeping a very close eye on everything. And, at the preliminary hearing a year ago, at that point, I was sitting in the front row. Right now, all the reporters are in the back row. But for the preliminary hearing, I was in the front row,
Nice.
and Vicky Podboreski sat down next to me. And I know who Vicky Podboreski is. I know she's been handling Scientology cases forever. She handles other things as well, not
Mhm.
just Scientology, but she's a known, Scientology attorney. And all the Scientologists in this case immediately signed up with her when the investigation was made public. So she's representing Sean Fabos and all these other guys. Okay.
Mhm.
At the preliminary hearing, she had a laptop and she was rapidly, and the way she was typing would ebb and flow with the conversation. I was like, she's keeping a transcript. Now,
Yep.
why would an attorney be keeping a transcript? Because attorneys can just get a transcript from the court reporter. And I realized based on, I was in Texas in 2013 for the Marty Rathman stuff, and I saw the Scientology attorneys running out with their cell phones every 5 minutes to tell Miscavige what was going on. So when I saw Vic Poboreski doing that, I realized she's giving a live feed to Miscavige.
Right, right, of course.
So I wrote a story about that. And I guess maybe Judge Olmedo reads the underground bunker. I don't know. But
I think so because she
right
handled it.
after that, she put in all these new rules against electronics in her courtroom. Okay. So this time, the attorneys that visit can't have laptops. But from day one, the first week was jury selection,
Mhm.
and because they needed all the seats for the potential jurors, they only allowed one reporter and one member of the public. And I was the reporter. Now they did let some others when there was some room, so I wasn't alone all that long. But for a while, I was the only reporter in the whole courtroom. And then one member of the public, and every day, this same guy would show up really early to make sure he was the first person and got that public seat. And then he was at all the other days too. Tall, on the younger side, maybe 35, 30, which is not old for an attorney.
Mhm.
Good looking dude, well dressed, everybody notices him. And so, we noticed that he was there every single day. And so a couple of reporters went up to him and said, so, which firm are you with? And he wouldn't say anything. Well, are you here for Scientology? Refused to answer. So we were all kind of like, okay, this is who Vicky's got in here,
Mm.
keeping an eye on things, right? So then I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks goes by, and then Jeffrey Augustine, he's in the audience with next to this guy, and he said at some point the guy's phone went off, and he looked down and it said Vicky Poboreski on the phone.
Wow. I mean, not that
So
it was hard to figure out, right?
I mean, yeah, and then the
Mhm.
other thing is, besides him, he was there every single day. On many
Oh,
days,
wow.
there was also an attorney named Dylan Millar. I know him by sight, and he's Vicky's younger colleague. And then finally, this week on like Tuesday and Wednesday, when the case was done, starting deliberations, who shows up now? Vicky Podboreski. And
Wow,
she's
so they
there,
are keeping
she's
an eye
there
on it.
hugging the Mastersons and everything. And I said, look, there's nothing wrong with Scientologists hugging a Scientology attorney. What the heck?
True.
But it just shows that the church has had their eyes on this the
Of
whole
course they
time.
have, and I wonder how deep that rabbit hole goes, Tony, because you never can put anything past Scientology, but you have to have evidence to prove jury tampering and all that stuff. Do you think that David Miscavige was the one that handled that cross-examination at the prelim where the ethics book got introduced?
Yes, absolutely. Because remember,
Really?
she's communicating we suspect Vicky Bobreski is communicating directly with Miscavige as the
Mhm.
hearing's going. Now, remember, I said she happened to be sitting next to me. So I'm front row. Tom Mesereau is sitting in front of me like 7 or 8 feet from me. Okay. At some point, I'm taking notes and I look up and I realize she's leaned forward. He's turned around and they're whispering. Well, Doug, I didn't, I, I could hear them, right? I mean, I didn't do
I
anything. I'm
know,
just sitting
you
there. I
were
didn't
right
lean into that or anything. I couldn't help it.
there.
And I heard her saying she's holding the ethics book, or he's holding the ethics book, and she's pointing at it saying, "It's not in there. It's not in there."
Wow, wow, you heard
At
that?
that point, then he turned around, went up to Jane Doe 3 and said, "Now, you said that in this book there's some prohibition against turning in a Scientologist to the police. Could you look through this chapter? And after lunch, you can tell us if you found it in there, right?" So after lunch, or maybe it was the next day, I don't remember, she came in. He said, "So, Jane Doe 3, did you go through that chapter?" "Yes." "Did you find anything in there about Scientologists not going to the police?" "No." "Thank you." Well, then the prosecutor, who overnight all of us had been emailing each other, and somebody forwarded to him, like, "Don't get fooled." He
Really?
went
Someone
over.
forwarded it to him, Tony? He got
I'm
intel
sure.
on that?
I can't. All I know is all of us that were watching the trial were emailing each other,
Wow.
the various policy letters and everything.
Mhm.
And the next day he went over to Mesro and he said, "Can I borrow that book?" And Mesro handed him the book. And Mueller turned to a different chapter, hands it to Jane Doe 3 and says, "Can you read that page, please?" And she reads the high crimes and suppressive acts
It's in
page
there. Yeah.
that says you can't turn in another Scientologist to civil authorities, which, Doug, includes the police. Oh,
Yep.
it was a beautiful moment. And
Oh, yes, it was.
the best part was that Mueller took the book, walked over to Mesro and said, hands it to him and says, "Thank you. It's been very helpful."
And what kinda
Oh,
what kinda homework did he have to do to pull off that moment? Because even as a Scientologist, it would have taken me a while, Tony, to refresh my memory and know what page that fricking thing was on.
I'm sure he was hearing from a lot of people.
Oh, definitely.
I didn't contact him, but I heard people, people contacted him and said, "Look, here's where it is." It was a beautiful moment, and it's
Mhm.
become a huge headache for them because that sort of established a precedent that
Yeah.
the defense brought the book in,
Yeah.
and then even until just a couple weeks ago, Doug, the judge was citing that, saying, "I know you want to keep Scientology out now, but you guys brought it into the preliminary." And remember, it was Podboreski who assured Mesro that that wasn't in there. Who did she hear that from? That was
Miscavige?
Miscavige's order.
Is M now is
I'm
Miscavige that big of
convinced.
a dumbass to not know he just thought he could trip him up, right?
Well,
'Cause
uh,
he would know that's in there. He would know
I would
damn well that's in
assume.
there,
I
right?
mean, I don't know,
But
but it's
I
just.
think so too, Tony. I think that that was on his orders. It was too unusual. It just seemed like a Miscavige thing. Do
And
do you
the other mistake they made was, when they subpoenaed me and the victims and the LAPD and all of us. They really pissed off the judge because they were not just asking for communications involving Masterson, but they wanted any communications about harassment about the church. And she's like,
Wow.
"You're trying to use the subpoena power in my court to get material for that civil lawsuit the church is involved in. You can't do that." And
Right.
I was like, "Okay, now who would have them do that?" There's no way
Let me think.
Mesereau defending Danny would be carrying Scientology's water unless it was Miscavige that told him to do so. So I just think
Right.
Miscavige has made some big, blunders early. And then now this new attorney tried his best to keep Scientology out. And,
Mhm.
I'm sure they're very happy with the results so far.
Did he establish the precedence for Scientology even being allowed to be let in? Was it not gonna possibly not be let in, or is it always gonna be there because of the alleged gaslighting as to why they took so long to report the gals?
Well, I know the prosecution wanted it in there.
Mhm.
And I think Mesereau's blunder just sort of eased it,
Sealed it.
made it easier for them to do so. But they were going to try anyway because they wanted to explain that, when Jane Doe 1 went to Julian Schwartz at
Mhm.
the Celebrity Center, what did he say? "We don't use that word rape. Don't use that word." And when Jane Doe 3 went, they told her that um, she was out exchange because
Yep.
Danny's Danny was providing a roof over her head, and her job as his girlfriend was to provide him sex.
Isn't that crazy? But you know what? That's how it was in Scientology, Tony. That made perfect sense, the exchange thing when you're in the bubble world. It seems absolutely insane and sociopathic in the outside world. You and Leah were talking about some really interesting stuff on the interview that you did with her a couple days ago, particularly the LAPD corruption slash cover up when it comes to Scientology. Again, you don't have to say anything that you're not comfortable saying, but it was very intriguing. Does that play any role possibly either behind the scenes in a cursory way about this particular case? Because I know, it's not everybody, like she said. It was the police chief, the police captain who's now retired that can you break that down? What I'm
Yeah,
asking you is, could you
sure,
please break that down? Because that was
sure.
fascinating. And also, what role, if any, might the compromised LAPD play in not only this particular case, but in possibly covering up a whole backlog of Scientology abuses that never came forward?
Right. So the absolutely stunning news that came out a couple weeks ago
It was, man.
was that a retired division commander of the Hollywood division, Captain Corey Palka, um, it turns out some documents were released in it by the New York Attorney General of all people
Wow.
that in 2017, I think a woman came to the Hollywood division alleging that she had been raped by the CEO of CBS, Les Moonves.
Amazing.
Palka had apparently worked security for Moonves at some point and was loyal to him. And so Palka did what he could to kill the investigation and make sure it never became public.
That's crazy.
And he was successful
That's
until
crazy.
um, the woman went to Ronan Farrow and New Yorker magazine. And in
Oh,
2018,
really?
he publicized the fact that she, had this case against Moonves, and Moonves, well, the day the story came out in the New Yorker, Moonves stepped down from, his job. So
And now he's
nobody,
shilling for Scientology. Didn't you
well,
guys
nobody
say that
would
you
have
freaking
known
saw?
any of this. Nobody would have known any of this, but apparently some new documents came out just documenting all this, and
I
it's
wonder why they came out.
stunning. It's stunning police corruption. We assume this kind of thing is going on, but
But
so
not on that
rarely.
level, Tony. It was really
Oh my,
shocking, man. It
incredible.
makes me go, where the hell? That's why I asked you about, is the police corruption? Do they possibly have a hand in
Well,
other
see,
parts of
so
justice?
for Leah and I, it hit us like a ton of bricks because
Mhm.
she and I have been talking about this Corey Polka guy for years.
Yeah.
He was openly Scientology's man in
Ye
the LAPD. And she would just always point out all that stuff he did to promote Scientology. He's the one that had that kiosk,
Mhm.
Scientology
A
kiosk
freaking
put
kiosk in the
in
police
the
department,
police
Tony.
station.
I mean, what the
So,
hell, man?
but the reason, the way it's related to this case is that when the women decided to go to the LAPD in 2016, it was so well known inside of the LAPD how corrupt the Hollywood division was and co opted by Scientology.
Really?
They told the women, we're going to have this handled secretly by the robbery homicide division downtown. And I published an email of Polka's in 2020, I think, after or 2021, when the story, yeah, when the story came out, when my story came out March 3rd, 2017, that these women had gone to the LAPD and that the LAPD was actively investigating it. That day, Corey Palka sent an email to somebody else at the LAPD saying, "Is this ours?" He didn't know it was going on because they had done what they could to keep it secret from him.
Oh
That's what I'm
my,
saying is
that's the
that the
compartmentalization in the freaking police department itself.
LAPD knew they had
Wow,
to keep it
dude.
out of his hands, so that's why.
My
So what Lee is
God,
asking for
man.
is, okay, look, now you have him. You have these documents proving how corrupt he was with the Les Moonves thing.
Now do
Can
something
you
about it.
please look into all the other things he had his hands in? All this,
Exactly.
and so that's what we're hoping
Exactly.
for. Yeah.
Good for her, man. And who that is stunning information because we always knew, but we never really had any hardcore evidence of just how compromised they were. And those documents were amazing. What do you think? With this jury being deadlocked, you made a good point. You said, because I immediately thought, well, he's going to be off, and they have to get him on 2 of the 3 charges, you said. If they only get him on 1 because of the statute of limitations, they had to bring multiple charges to put it 45 to life. If they, if he only gets 1, Tony, what happens? And then also, well, I guess we'll just start with that. What happens if it comes back where they
Right.
just
So
got
the
him on 1?
LAPD, I mean, the DA's office could not charge Danny on any individual case of these three because they're too old, because of
Mhm.
statute of limitations. But California has this one strike law, 667.61.
Nice.
And if one of the crimes that fits it is forcible rape, and that means specifically that there was use of force or fear, and the woman, did what she could to make it not happen. Because
Mhm.
if when Danny is accused of raping a woman unconsciously, that doesn't fit it. She's got to be, trying to anyway. So
Oh,
3
wow.
counts of so what they're doing is forcible rape fits that one strike law, which says if there are multiple forcible rapes, it qualifies. And when it's when it does get that enhancement, the penalty for any one of the forcible rapes is 15 to life. And as Deputy DA Mueller explained at a pretrial hearing, once there's a potential life sentence involved, there's no statute of limitations.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
But you got to have that word multiple.
I
So
see.
they filed 3 to get 2. All right. They
Mhm.
need 2. And if they get 2, 30 to life. If they get 3, 45 to life. All right.
Wow.
But they need 2. And so it's just, I think people were stunned to hear that they can't agree on all 3.
Yeah, and what do you think they prevented them from bringing the 5 original ones in to perhaps increase the
Right.
case?
So 4 and 5, we know who they are now. Jane Doe 4 is Trisha Vesey. She gave me the permission to identify her. She's an
Mhm.
actress, well known, very talented independent film actress from the late 90s, early 2000s. And she came in and testified. It was some of the most compelling testimony I saw. She was just
Wow.
amazing.
Wow.
Her allegation is all the way back to 96. And I think they felt that, um, I don't think it was the age. I think it was, well, I'm not 100% sure, Doug. I think it was something about, I think DA Mueller said something about that it didn't quite fit the definitions of forcible rape, which have specific things. But for
Mhm.
whatever reason, no question, she's alleging sexual assault. I mean, there's no question that that's her stories fit very much like the others. The 5th person is Babette Realis, and she's in the
Oh,
civil suit.
right.
But I think the reason why she's not in the criminal case is I think she was unconscious for what happened to her. And this is again
Oh my god.
with the particular definition of forcible rape that they're using, it just eliminates some of these, even though they're disgusting, awful things that
Oh
he's
my
accused of.
god. Yep,
So
it
that's
is a
that's
pattern.
5, and they actually talked to more women than that. But
I
those are the
know.
5
I know.
that the DA mentioned when they charged.
And get that, audience, he just said even more were brought forward. So this is a pattern of a serial rapist. This is what you call a serial rapist. But
I
again,
mean,
he has to be
I would
convicted.
call him that if he was convicted, but
If he's
he's
convicted, we shall see. Now, Tony, before we get up to the civil case here to kind of put a stamp on all this, this being deadlocked. Now, I immediately thought, okay, if they don't come back with a decision right away, that's it. He's going to get off. But you pointed out that's not necessarily the case. It's not unprecedented where they have other people, that do take a long time. Any ideas of? No, I know you don't know what they're locked on, but it's not assured that he's going to get off, right?
no, I mean, there's a couple of different scenarios. I mean,
Mhm.
remember the Ghislaine Maxwell case had about a month
Mhm.
of testimony. That took 5 days of deliberation.
I remember you saying that in the
And I
interview.
think maybe, part of the issue is just this holiday week. I mean, if this holiday week wasn't here, they'd just have the jury come back Monday and keep going.
Mhm.
It's only been 2 and it's not surprising that they have differences of opinion, and maybe if they worked at it,
Right,
they could
right.
all come to a decision one way or the other, conviction or acquittal, whatever. Um, so the different scenarios are, so they're going to come back in a week. And defense attorney Phil Cohen has a point that that's not ideal because they're going to be around family members who might bring it up, or they
Yeah.
might check their phone and see a story and can't help themselves and read it. But the judge has said, "Look, I've admonished them. They know they're not supposed to do that. We'll just trust them." So we come back in a week, start deliberating it again, see if they can. Now, at the end of that day, or in the afternoon of that day,
Of the first
if
day, Tony? Just
of
one
the
day?
first of the
Okay.
first day, this is what Deputy DA Anson told us reporters, that afternoon, if there's still the same problem, then the jury will be brought out and the attorneys will be allowed to ask them some questions in order to see if there's something they could clear up for them. And then send them back and do more and more and more. And then at some point, um, and I've seen it. I've seen it in her courtroom because when we were just starting this trial, she was still finishing up another one, and we saw it. There was a jury that was struggling, and she was telling them, you know, you got to try some more. And then they came back, and she finally did declare a mistrial because they couldn't
Oh, wow.
decide. So I've seen her do that, and so she may end up doing that and declaring a mistrial. Well, at that point, we
Mhm.
will learn to split.
They'll
And
tell you how many that means how many people was
I
for and
saw her do
against.
it. I saw her ask the
Wow.
foreperson, "Don't, just tell me how many for conviction, how many for acquittal," and the jury person said, I can't remember what it was in that case. It was a gun case with somebody. Anyway, but, at that point, if she declares a mistrial, then it's up to the prosecutor whether to refile and have another trial.
Oh my god. Could you imagine the gals having to go through that again if that was the
Oh my
case? Could you even
god.
imagine,
Oh
man?
my god. And, then the split may affect. I mean, if it's 11-1 for acquittal,
Then they won't
the
retry it.
prosecutor may have a hard time coming back.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know what Mueller's track record is on that. But yeah, if this jury can't figure things out next week, we may be coming back in the spring to do it all over
I
again.
hope not. For the sake of these gals, man. They can't go through that again. That's too much. That's
Well, I
incredible.
think they'd rather go through it again than
I know, I bet you they would.
not
I mean,
have
they
the
came this
jury.
far. I'm sure they'd be willing to do it again, but it would just be nice to get a decision one way or the other.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess I really appreciate, you giving me your time. We're wrapping
Sure.
up here in the last 10 minutes. You're like an encyclopedia, Tony. So I could just pick your brain forever. I mean, I really appreciate you covering this every day. But I wanted to ask you, what keeps you motivated for what, 2 decades? I mean, seriously, how do you not give up, or do you get frustrated? Like, how the hell do you
Yeah,
stay motivated?
this week is 27 years, man.
27 years since you've been reporting on Scientology, and this is like almost every day after the Village Voice, right? After you got your own thing going, it
No, I
was every day.
started every day at the Village Voice in 2011, and,
Wow.
so yeah, it's 27 years since my first Scientology story at the Phoenix New Times in 1995, but daily I gave myself the job of daily beat reporter in April 2011,
Mhm.
so, 11 years ago, and I don't know, man, I
Do
love
you still
breaking
find it
stories.
fascinating? Do
I
you
love
still
breaking
like it?
stories. I get so jazzed. I mean, even during this trial, I was breaking stories
Mhm.
about, the women, the Jane Doe 2 and Jane Doe 3 hiring new attorneys for the civil lawsuit. That was a story I broke right in the middle of the trial. Um, a Tommy Davis thing in New York. So
Yeah,
even though
that
I'm
came out of
sitting in a
left field.
courtroom
Mhm.
in LA, I broke a story about what Tommy Davis did on a street in Soho in New York.
That was
I
crazy,
just
by the
I
way.
just love doing that. I have so much fun with it, and, um, I don't know. I
It's your
you
purpose in life, Tony, and you didn't have to go to Scientology for
well,
them to tell you what your purpose
believe
was.
me, some of these
Uh-huh.
other reporters, and I really had a great time. These other reporters are so cool, and they love asking me questions about Scientology. And yeah, a
I
couple of them
bet.
are like, don't you get tired of this?" I'm like, "No, I don't know. I really enjoy it." And they can see it. I mean, they see how, and a lot of it is that I have this wonderful, very responsive audience, and
Mm.
that
Yes.
they,
They
I
feed
got
your drive.
right from the beginning at the Village Voice, something happened, and I got this really wonderful community going where You go to some places and you get tons of comments, but nobody's talking to each other. They're all just, you know what I'm saying? But at the
Mhm.
at the bunker, they are talking to each other. It's a conversation.
Right,
And
right.
that also keeps me going is we got this great community. And many of them, like you, were in Scientology for years and years and know
Yeah.
far more about it than I do. So the challenge I set for myself was simply every single day, I'm going to try to bring you something about Scientology you haven't seen before, even if you were in it for 30 years. And
And
it's a
you've
fun
done that,
challenge.
man. Hey, have you ever had a day where you don't have material and you just had to pull something out of your ass? How do you do it
You
every
know
day?
there are days that are lighter, there are days that are more newsy, there are days that are whimsical.
Mhm.
Um, Fortunately, I have this endless curiosity about L. Ron Hubbard and his speeches and stuff, and I'll just if I know that I'm going usually I have a bunch of things lined up, but if it's getting, the well's getting dry, I'll just go back and look through his lectures and find some crazy thing he said.
And
I'm
you
like,
have found some
I
crazy
can
ass
say
shit,
something on
man.
that, yeah. So, but,
That's funny.
I'm also very fortunate. I've had some great correspondence and,
Mhm.
like this past year, Bruce Hines has written some incredible things for me. Louise, oh God, I'm gonna forget her last name. Louise Fletcher, that's the name of the actress. Um, oh God, Louise is gonna kill me. I forgot her last
If
name.
you forget, I can
Schechter,
just put it
Schechter,
as
Schechter. I'm
okay.
sorry. Louise Schechter has been writing these amazing things about her time on the Apollo. Sonny Pereira
Right,
contributes
right.
things about working at the Hollywood Celebrity Center. So I'm just very fortunate that because people know that okay, the underground bunkers audience is not the biggest out there, but they care passionately. And so
Yeah,
if you give us a great story, people are going to be talking about it all day. And
right.
authors love that reaction and feedback and stuff. So that's why people like to contribute things, and it's increased now because of the trial. I'm starting to hear
Yeah,
from a
and
lot more people.
congratulations, your YouTube channel's been popping off, subscribers are going off the roof, but you deserve it, man. You've been providing awesome reporting for so long, and this Masterson, it really has felt like a front row seat, man, just even reading those things.
I've told people that in this little world we're in, this is the Super Bowl,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I have a front row seat at the Super Bowl. You can't
that
get no
makes
better than
sense,
that.
and you get fed by the people, which keeps your drive going. Because I don't know how any and you've actually achieved that target. Have you ever missed one day on accident or, how many days have you missed in the last 11 years? Any?
Years ago, like, I would if I put 2 or 3 stories on one day, I would just leave it up the next day. I was too exhausted. But
I
I
see.
try now to diet it, so there's just something every single day. I do my best to have something every day. But
That's
listen, you're
amazing, that's
right. Some
amazing.
days it's lighter than others. Someday I've just gotten some crazy flyer that they've put together about their fundraising. I'm like,
Those are
that's
good too, man.
but those are
I get a
great
kick
days.
out of reading them.
I get more comments on those days than any other, and they're the
Really?
easiest for me to do. So you know, that's the thing is sometimes I'll work really hard on a
And
story and
get
I've got to
no
call
views and then some
people,
freaking
and then
flyer.
people are just sort of like, "Oh yeah, Tony, that's cool, but let's talk about something else." So
Yeah,
but when
yeah.
you put a flyer up, they just love it.
I do too, man. Hey, have you ever been, you had a smile on your face, you don't look, as they say in Scientology, down tone when you were reporting, and yet you're kind of there with the quote unquote enemy, they're eyeballing you. I mean, you don't seem did these people intimidate you at all, Tony? And do you fear for your life at all?
Well, they've run various OSA operations, and they're pretty awful. Some of them. Doug, I will often send Karen Powell an email asking for comment. They never respond.
Mhm.
They never, and I would put their response in if they gave it to me.
Yeah,
Instead,
I know you would.
what they do is they target my wife, they target my mother,
Really?
they target people I know. They've run some scary operations. The one thing I told Leah about this, I told Alex Kibney about this on Going Clear. They hired an out of work daily news reporter to pretend that he was working on a story that my wife was a terrorist, and they wanted comment from her employers.
That's so evil.
And the reason why they said that was that remember back when Anonymous was around
Of course.
in 2008,
Mhm.
they not only were doing these protests, they had web forums, and there were thousands of people on there sharing information about Scientology, joking about Scientology, having fun. And my wife, this was a few years before I met her, was over there cracking some jokes about Scientology. That's it. Now they consider Anonymous to be a terrorist
Yep.
organization.
Terrorist cell.
Therefore, my wife is a terrorist. You see, that's the logic they use
Yeah.
to try to freak out her employers
Yeah.
to get her fired, because that's what they want to do to try to harm me. And they had, Dave LeBeau, the private investigator, showed up at my
Yeah.
mother's house a couple of
That
times.
douchebag. Yeah.
So, I mean, they've run those operations against me, and they kind of come and go. Um, but I just, Mike Rinder and I have talked about this. What they
Mhm.
want is they want to create a psychological dread that
Exactly.
that eats you up, so that you're
Exactly.
totally paranoid and afraid, and you go away. But Mike and I realize that they're really more like Keystone Cops, and the best thing is just to laugh at them,
Good.
because I got a job to do. There's stuff to be written about. There are things to
Good.
do, and I can't let them slow me down. So, they don't hit me as hard as like Leah right now. They Oh my goodness, they're
I
really going
know.
after Leah.
She's been a very bad girl doing those tweets, hasn't she?
Yes, she has.
I love her balls, Tony. Oh my god, she doesn't give a fuck. If she feels it, she puts it out there, man. That was a
Yeah.
strong, strong move.
Oh, I was surprised. I mean,
So was I.
when that Polka news came up, she contacted me. She said, "Did you see this?" I said, "Yeah, that's the guy you've been telling me about for years."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I shared some. I made sure she knew about those emails I had published of his. And so in her tweet storm, one of the things was she was pointing to those emails. And so we had talked before she did that. I just didn't realize she was going to make it such a big thing. And then it took off like crazy, to the
Yeah, it
point
got
where the
went
LAPD
viral.
itself responded that week.
Really? What did they respond? What did they
They
say?
put out this silly thing. I wrote about that too. You can see it on my Substack, where
Oh, wow. I
they,
didn't
yeah,
catch that, man.
they put out a statement about Shelley Miscavige and everything.
Oh, right. I
And
did catch
and
that.
they got some things wrong. And so then I wrote a piece. Look, this is what we really know.
That
And
was great, by the
um,
way, because they did
thank
try
you.
to make it look like Leah just they reported the same day it's missing, but when you report it, no, there was a 2-day or 3-day lag, between that. Those
Right.
the LAPD, God, it's just so disturbing that they had this freaking, cult in there, like, that they have anything at all to do with them, let alone a freaking kiosk. So, Tony, I guess we'll end off, on this
Bring
final
to a bigger
question because.
implementation.
Sorry? Oh, I think we cut out a little bit. But hey, we got it this far without cutting out. So I have minimal editing to do. But I guess again, I really appreciate your time, man. And just one final question, because we're gonna know in the next week or two where this trial is gonna go. But then we have coming up this civil suit. First of all, do we have to wait for this to finish, be refiled or whatever before the civil suit starts, or does it have an exact date?
That's a good
That
question. I mean, right now, the judge has keeping the civil suit on ice until December 13th,
hmm
because we all expected the trial would be done by then.
hmm
But now, if there's a hung jury and a mistrial declared and Mueller's going to refile, I'm not sure what that's going to mean for the civil suit. But like I said, the Scientology has already said that its next move is going to be an anti-slap. And the
yeah.
anti-slap is this wonder. It's an amazing thing. Anti-slap statutes were developed to try to protect like whistleblowers from big bullies,
hmm
right? So before anti-slap uh, statutes, the big bullies, like you think of Monsanto or whatever, tobacco companies, they could just sue people to keep them quiet, right? And then these laws came in and said, look, you should be able to file this thing uh, that called an anti-slap. Those are called slap suits, basically. And this is
hmm
an anti-slap, which asks the judge to look at the overall situation before it really gets going and decide, now, is this a legitimate lawsuit, or is this just an attempt by a big bully to silence the little guy? Okay.
Right.
And they've been
What a great
great. It's
law,
a
by the way.
great law. It's a
No
great
shit.
law. People use it really well. I've used it. My company, when I was the Village Voice, we used it.
Really?
It's a great law. Okay. But when Scientology is using it, they were literally one of the big bullies
No
that
kidding. They're trying
that
to
the
reverse
California, yes, the
wow,
California
that's retarded.
legislature, when they passed California's law, had Scientology in mind. So when Scientology is using the law,
Really?
what
They had
they're
him in mind.
saying is that these three women are the big bullies,
That's
and they and they are
Ridiculous.
infringing on Scientology's free speech
That
rights.
they really do feel that too, Tony, because as you know, and you've made a point many times and people ask you, "Oh, Tom Cruise and John Travolta, they're just believing in it because blackmail material." No, they really believe it. That's the way we think. Wow, man. So and as you said earlier, Tony, right? It's not even gonna get to the civil suit. They're gonna wait until the last minute, do everything they can, and then they're gonna settle possibly at the very end if something
I mean,
how do you think that'll work
if
out?
you go by history, they will file the anti-SLAPP.
Mhm,
After that gets knocked down, then they'll file for summary judgment. After that gets knocked down, they'll try something else. And then
mhm.
finally, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, a trial will be scheduled. And, maybe we'll find out that Lisa Marie Presley is going to testify or whatever. And everyone's
Yeah,
going to get real excited. And then the week before it starts, Miscavige is going to write a check.
yeah. So we had this civil suit that was possibly gonna, expose Scientology. We had the best shot at this Masterson case. I honestly thought, Tony, they were gonna sneak Scientology into this. I mean, the fact that it even became a peripheral thing because of the gaslighting that the gals had allegedly experienced, it's amazing that they even got it in. But I said in a recent interview, I try not to get too excited about this stuff because it seemed like all the aces were set up where finally something's gonna happen to Scientology. But Tony, they win every time, and until I see that thing actually die, actually go away, they're like they always come back from fucking
This
anything.
Danny Masterson trial, no doubt. Scientology took a drubbing. I mean, no doubt,
Mhm.
all kinds of press.
That's good
Maybe
at
some of
least.
it was kept out, but the stuff that did make it in was devastating.
You're
Okay,
right, good point.
the civil case is coming. There's the trafficking case in Florida,
Right,
and
right.
I've seen some people kind of going online and say the end of Scientology, the end is here, and I'm like, what are you
Yeah, but it's
talking
not, is it?
about? It's
You
not. I
know.
mean, none of these things ever turn out quite the way you think they are,
I
and really,
know, and
the
I
end
know,
is
man.
not going to happen. Nothing significant's going to happen until the federal government decides to do something. And
That's a great point.
I haven't seen it yet. When is the FBI? When is the Department of Justice? Because the LA District Attorney's Office is not going to make a huge dent. It's going to be the federal government. So we keep waiting, but you're right. It's kind of amazing how they tend to slip out of these things.
They never die, but, that's why we keep fighting, and I really appreciate it personally, man, as an ex-Scientologist for you exposing this evil, vile cult. Tony, before we end off, where can people find you, and what would you like to say, regards that?
Please sign up for free emails at tonyortega.substack.com. You'll get my daily stories right to your inbox. When I'm at the trial, you'll get my, hour by hour reports of what's going on. And you don't even have to remember where to go on the web. It comes to you.
I'm
And
signed up, it's great, dude.
so please join us there.
Thank you, and audience, links to the description, to find Tony's Substack will be in the description box, and again, my friend, I really appreciate you coming on and
Thank you, Doug. You're
dedicating,
doing a great job, man.
Thank you, man. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.